You got something in here you don't want me to see?
You're searching without consent. State your legal reason on camera.
All right. You're being detained.
Detained for what? You haven't stated a reason.
Shut up and turn around. Hands behind your back.
A traffic officer thought he could pull over a black man in a silver Mercedes, treat him like a criminal, search his car without consent, and then force an arrest when nothing turned up. What that officer didn't know was that the driver he was pushing around was an active senior deputy U.S. Marshal, and the entire stop was being recorded on body cam in a way that would be impossible to explain later. At this moment, we want to tell you that we're incredibly grateful you chose to spend your time with us today. Your support keeps this channel alive and thriving. Now tell us where you're watching from, your state or country, in the comments. And if you like stories where people stay calm, keep their rights clear, and bad behavior gets real consequences, hit like and subscribe. Here's how it started. Malcolm Reed was driving home in a silver Mercedes. He was going the speed limit, staying in his lane, and using signals. It was early evening with steady traffic. The road ran past a shopping plaza and restaurants. A patrol car got behind him and stayed there for longer than normal. Malcolm noticed it but kept driving normally. He didn't speed up, slow down, or change lanes suddenly. Then the patrol car activated its lights. Malcolm signaled and pulled over to a safe spot on the shoulder. He shut off the engine, rolled the driver's window down, and kept both hands visible on the steering wheel. Officer Tyler Grady walked up to the driver's side. He did not clearly state why Malcolm was being stopped. He immediately focused on the vehicle and Malcolm's identity. He asked for license and registration in a hostile tone. Malcolm provided his license and registration. He asked for the reason for the stop. Grady did not give a clear reason. He kept asking questions about the Mercedes, including who it belonged to and how Malcolm got it. His questions implied he believed the car was stolen or that Malcolm was involved in something illegal. Malcolm stayed calm and kept his responses limited to what was required. He asked again for the reason for the stop. Grady escalated. He ordered Malcolm to step out of the vehicle. Malcolm complied. He exited slowly and kept his hands visible. He stood where Grady directed him. Grady immediately performed a pat-down. It was rough and aggressive. Malcolm did not resist. He stayed still and kept his voice controlled. Malcolm stated clearly that he did not consent to any search of the vehicle. Grady ignored that statement. He positioned Malcolm away from the Mercedes and moved towards the vehicle as if he was going to search anyway. Malcolm repeated that he did not consent. Grady proceeded as if the refusal didn't matter and prepared to search the car. Grady searched the Mercedes anyway, even after Malcolm clearly stated he did not consent. He started in the front cabin, moving fast, like he wanted it to look routine. He opened the center console and looked through it. He checked the glove compartment. He moved items around and looked into smaller compartments, not because he had a specific safety concern, but because he was trying to find something, anything, that would justify the way he had been speaking to Malcolm since the first seconds of the stop. Malcolm stayed where Grady placed him, several steps away from the vehicle, positioned so he couldn't interfere. Malcolm kept his hands visible and kept his posture calm. He did not move toward the car. He didn't raise his voice. He repeated one key point clearly so the camera would catch it. He did not consent to a search. Grady ignored that and kept going. He leaned into the passenger side area and checked places that didn't match any claimed reason for the stop. He looked under the front seats. He checked door pockets. He didn't find anything. And instead of stopping, he expanded the search. He opened the rear doors and searched the back seat area. He lifted floor mats and checked underneath. He looked between seat cushions. It wasn't a quick look for a weapon within reach. It was a search meant to produce a result. While he did it, Grady kept talking, trying to build a story out loud. He described Malcolm as nervous and not answering simple questions, even though Malcolm's behavior was controlled and his answers were basic. Grady kept implying there were signs without naming what they were. That's a common move when there's no real basis. Keep saying there's something, but never commit to a specific fact that can be disproven. Malcolm did not argue back and forth. He didn't get pulled into a debate. He stayed focused on clear, short statements. His lack of consent, his cooperation with commands, and his request for the reason for the stop. Grady still found nothing. No contraband, no weapon, no stolen property indicators, no baggies, no smell source, no open containers, no tools or items that could be claimed as burglary tools. Nothing. At that point, Grady had two options: end the stop and walk away, or double down and try to regain control. He doubled down. He shut the door and turned back toward Malcolm, changing his tone from searching to accusing. He told Malcolm he was being detained. Malcolm asked for the reason. Grady did not provide a clear reason. He circled back to the same vague insinuations he'd used from the beginning, suspicion based on nothing concrete. Malcolm remained calm and asked again for the reason for the stop. He also stated again that he did not consent to the search that had just happened. Grady reacted like Malcolm's calmness was disrespect. That's when Grady escalated to physical control. He stepped into Malcolm's space, grabbed his arm, and moved to apply handcuffs. Malcolm did not pull away. He did not jerk. He did not tense up and give Grady a reason to claim resistance. He kept his hands positioned where Grady directed and allowed the cuffs to go on. But Malcolm made sure the record stayed clear. He said Grady was making a mistake and that his identity would be confirmed once his information was properly run. Grady acted like that didn't matter. He tightened the cuffs and continued treating it like a justified arrest. He walked Malcolm toward the patrol car, positioning him near the rear passenger side like he was about to place him inside. People were driving by. Some slowed down. A couple of heads turned from the sidewalk near the plaza entrance. Not a crowd, but enough visibility to make it humiliating and to make Grady feel like he had an audience. Then Grady finally did what he should have done at the start. He went to verify Malcolm's identity through dispatch. He radioed in Malcolm's name and information. His voice sounded confident, like he expected the system to back him up. Dispatch responded normally at first, then asked him to repeat the name and date of birth. Grady repeated it. There was a pause. Dispatch came back with a different tone, more formal, more careful. They informed him that Malcolm Reed returned as active law enforcement at the federal level, and that the record required additional confirmation. They instructed Grady to stand by. Grady tried to keep control of the scene, but the shift had already happened. He glanced at Malcolm, then away, as if he was recalculating. He started speaking faster on the radio, asking follow-up questions that sounded less like policing and more like damage control. Dispatch escalated it to a supervisor. Grady attempted to change his approach mid-stop. His posture softened slightly. His voice lowered. He stopped acting like Malcolm was a criminal suspect and started acting like this might become a problem for him personally. Malcolm didn't respond to the switch. He didn't argue. He didn't accept any "let's calm down" tone as if they were both equally responsible for what just happened. He stayed calm because he understood what mattered now: the footage, the sequence, and the lack of legal basis. Within minutes, Sergeant Dana Klein arrived. She didn't walk up like she was coming to support Grady emotionally. She walked up like she was there to take control of a situation that had already gone off track. She looked at Malcolm's cuffs first. Then she looked at Grady. Then she looked at the Mercedes. She asked Grady for the reason for the stop. Not the long version, not the opinion version, the actual reason. Grady tried to explain. It came out unclear and inconsistent. He referenced vague suspicion and tried to justify the search after the fact. Klein didn't argue with him on the shoulder. She did what competent supervisors do when they know something is wrong. She separated the officer from the driver and de-escalated immediately. She spoke directly to Malcolm in a professional tone and confirmed his identity through procedure. She had Malcolm uncuffed. She returned his license and registration. She kept the body cams running and made sure the stop ended without further escalation. Grady stood back, visibly frustrated, but he didn't have leverage anymore. The reason he didn't have leverage wasn't Malcolm's job title. It was the fact that Grady had created a stop with no solid justification, performed a search after non-consent, and then tried to turn the situation into an arrest when the search came up empty. Before Malcolm left, he made one clean statement to Klein that mattered. He didn't threaten. He didn't raise his voice. He made it clear that the footage would speak for itself and that the stop would be addressed through proper channels. Malcolm left the scene without raising his voice and without making it personal. He drove off, parked in a well-lit lot a few minutes away, and documented what mattered while it was fresh: the location, the approximate time, the sequence of events, and the key actions. No reason stated for the stop, rough pat-down, search after non-consent, cuffs with no evidence, and the name run that changed everything. He did not post online. He did not call friends to vent. He handled it like someone trained to build clean records. That night, Malcolm notified the right people through official channels. He reported that a local officer conducted an unlawful stop and search and attempted a baseless arrest while he was off duty. He included the officer's name and badge number, the patrol unit number if remembered, and the supervisor's name who responded. By the next morning, the department was already reacting. Because the moment a supervisor shows up to a stop involving an active federal law enforcement officer, the paperwork stops being optional. The stop gets logged, the body cam becomes evidence, and people above the patrol level start asking questions they can't ignore. Sergeant Dana Klein filed her own incident report. She included the basics. She responded to a traffic stop, verified the driver's identity, and terminated the detention. But she also had to account for why the stop escalated to cuffs and a search. That meant she had to document what Grady claimed and what he could actually support. And that's where Grady's story started collapsing. Grady wrote his version like most officers do when they know a review is coming. He tried to justify the stop with vague language. He described Malcolm as suspicious and implied there were indicators. He wrote that he felt officer safety concerns and suggested the search was necessary, but the body cam footage didn't match the report. A report can claim nervous behavior. The camera shows calm, compliant behavior. A report can claim refused to cooperate. The camera shows a driver providing license and registration and following commands. A report can claim probable cause. The camera shows no clear reasons stated before the search, and a clear non-consent statement ignored. That gap is what turns a complaint into a case. Within days, Internal Affairs opened a formal investigation. They requested all recordings: Grady's body cam, Klein's body cam, any dash camera, and dispatch audio. They also pulled the CAD log to see the timeline, when the stop began, when the name was run, and exactly when the supervisor was called. They interviewed Grady first. That's standard. Give the officer a chance to explain before confronting him with the footage. Grady tried to keep his explanation broad. He said he believed the vehicle might be stolen. He said Malcolm's questions felt combative. He said he searched for safety reasons. He said the cuffs were to secure the scene. But IA doesn't build cases on feelings. They build them on policy and sequence. They asked him the simplest question: what traffic violation did he observe that justified the stop? Grady didn't have a clean answer. Then they asked the next one: what specific legal basis allowed him to search after the driver clearly stated he didn't consent? Grady tried to talk around it. Then they asked the one that ended his room to maneuver: why did he try to arrest when the search found nothing? Grady had no good answer for that because the video showed it was about control, not evidence. At the same time, Malcolm filed a civil rights complaint through the process that actually moves things: written statement, request for preservation of evidence, and a formal demand that the department retain all body cam and dispatch audio. He wasn't asking them to look into it. He was putting them on notice. He also retained counsel. The attorney didn't come in yelling. She came in methodical. She requested footage. She requested the officers stop history. She requested training records. She asked for prior complaints. She asked whether Grady had a pattern of stops that started as no reason stated and ended in searches. That's when the city's legal department got involved. Because this wasn't only a personnel problem, it was a liability problem. An unlawful stop, unlawful search, and false arrest exposure are exactly the kind of claims that cost departments real money, especially when video makes the timeline obvious. A few weeks later, the body cam footage was reviewed at a higher level. Not just IA, command staff, city attorneys, risk management, and the department could see it clearly. Grady's approach was wrong from the beginning. He escalated without facts. He ignored a clear statement of non-consent. He searched anyway. He found nothing. Then he tried to arrest anyway. That last part mattered the most. Searching with no basis is serious. Trying to arrest after the search fails is worse because it shows the goal wasn't safety or investigation. It was authority. Grady was placed on administrative leave pending the investigation. His gun and badge were turned in. His patrol access was cut. His shifts were covered. It was quiet, but everyone in the building knew why. Then, the department tried the predictable internal move. Contain it. They reached out through official channels and floated the idea of resolving the situation quickly. Not an apology on the record. Not an admission of wrongdoing. More like an attempt to make it go away before it became public and before a lawsuit forced disclosures. Malcolm didn't take that route. He didn't want a quiet conversation. He wanted the record corrected and the behavior addressed. He understood what happens when incidents like this get handled quietly. The officer learns nothing. The department changes nothing. And the next driver doesn't have the same protection or documentation. So the case moved forward. A formal notice of claim was filed. The allegations were clear. Unlawful stop, unlawful search, unlawful detention, false arrest attempt, and excessive force during the pat-down and handcuffing. It wasn't written with dramatic language. It was written with timestamps. And that's what made it dangerous for the city, because the facts weren't complicated. The video made them simple. The city couldn't treat this like a normal complaint anymore. Malcolm's attorney had the body cam footage, the dispatch audio, and the supervisor response in writing. The timeline was clear. No stated reason for the stop. Immediate criminal assumptions, a rough pat-down, a search after Malcolm said he didn't consent. Then cuffs and an arrest attempt after the search produced nothing. That combination forced the city into decision mode. They opened formal settlement discussions, while internal affairs finished their work. That's common in cases like this, because the city doesn't want a jury watching body cam footage that makes the officer look reckless and the department look careless. Even if the city thinks it can defend parts of it, the risk is too high when the footage is straightforward. Internal Affairs completed its investigation and sustained multiple violations against Grady. The department didn't frame it as one mistake. They framed it as a pattern of bad judgment during a single encounter, initiating a stop without a clear, documented reason, escalating without evidence, conducting a search without valid consent or a legal exception, and applying cuffs without probable cause. That last point is what ended him. Because it wasn't just a bad stop. It was an attempted false arrest on camera. Grady was terminated. His termination letter cited policy violations related to traffic stops, search procedures, and arrest standards. He tried to appeal through the usual channels, but the body cam removed his ability to argue misunderstanding. The footage showed the sequence too clearly, and then came the certification issue. When an officer is fired for misconduct tied to unlawful actions, it doesn't just affect that department. It affects whether they can be hired anywhere else. Grady's file followed him. He could apply elsewhere, but departments that did their homework would see the same thing. He escalated a stop based on assumptions, then tried to arrest when he couldn't justify it. His law enforcement future collapsed fast. On the civil side, the case moved forward with pressure on the city. Malcolm's attorney filed in federal court under civil rights claims, including unlawful stop, unlawful search, unlawful detention, and false arrest. The filing was written like the video, clean and chronological. The city settled. They did it without admitting liability, because cities almost always try to avoid that language. But the settlement included real money, and it included non-monetary terms that mattered more long-term. The department agreed to changes tied directly to what happened to Malcolm. Supervisors required to respond sooner when a stop escalates to a search or cuffs without clear cause. Documented articulation required for traffic stops and searches, body cam compliance and regular audits, refresher training on consent searches and detention standards, and review of officers with repeated complaints involving stops that escalate without clear reasons. The department also had to preserve and produce footage faster under tighter rules, so footage couldn't disappear through delay or sloppy handling. Malcolm didn't celebrate publicly. He didn't do interviews to go viral. He didn't make it about status. He focused on the point that mattered. This happened because an officer decided his assumptions were enough to treat someone like a suspect. And Malcolm knew the only reason it didn't end worse is because he stayed calm, complied with lawful commands, and kept the record clear while the camera recorded the rest. Weeks later, Malcolm returned to normal life. Same kind of driving, same calm routine. But he also knew something important had shifted. The department had to put in writing what they were willing to tolerate. And Grady became an example inside that agency, not a hero, not a bad luck story, a warning. Because the system can ignore complaints when there's no proof. It can argue when there's no video. But when an officer's own camera shows an unlawful stop turning into a search, and then an arrest attempt with no cause, the excuses don't hold. So here's the takeaway for anyone watching. If you're ever in a situation like this, staying calm isn't weakness. It keeps you safe and keeps the story clear. Short statements matter. Consent matters. Asking for the reason matters. And cameras, body cams, dash cams, phones, business cameras, change outcomes because they stop people from rewriting what happened later. Now I want to ask you, if you were Malcolm, would you have stayed as calm as he did? Or would you have pushed back harder in the moment? And have you ever had a routine stop turn into something that felt personal? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Share the story with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more stories like this, where people hold their ground and accountability catches up, make sure you like and subscribe.
All right, stand up right now.
I'm paraplegic. I can show you my ID and medical
Paper doesn't
paperwork.
matter. Stand up and prove it.
You're asking me to do something I physically can't do. I'm offering verification.
I think you're faking. Stand up.
You're creating a situation where
Either
I can't
take the
do
ID
anything,
or
right?
call a supervisor.
A police officer thought he could stand outside a medical wellness center, accuse a wheelchair user of lying about his disability, and force him to stand up in front of strangers. What he didn't know was that the man in that wheelchair wasn't just any client trying to get through his day. He was a medically retired federal agent who knew procedure, knew documentation, and knew exactly how officers try to twist a story when they lose control of a scene. And at this moment, we want to tell you that we're incredibly grateful that you've chosen to spend your time with us today. Your support keeps this channel alive and thriving. Now, real quick, tell us where you're watching from in the comments, state or country. And if you follow these stories for real accountability when someone abuses authority, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. This took place outside the Lakeside Adaptive Wellness Center at 2:15 p.m. on a Tuesday. The entrance and curb area were active. Clients were arriving and leaving. Staff were moving in and out. A security guard was positioned near the front. Security cameras covered the entrance and much of the parking area. The man in the wheelchair was Daniel Mercer, 50. He had been a federal agent until an on-duty injury in 2015 left him paraplegic. He was medically retired and used a wheelchair full-time. He came to Lakeside for therapy and adaptive training. He was known by staff and had a routine there. The officer was Travis Keene. He approached Daniel and did not treat it like a normal contact. He treated it like he had already decided Daniel was lying. He started with commands instead of questions and demanded that Daniel stand up and walk. Daniel told Keene he was paraplegic and could not stand. He offered proof right away. He attempted to provide identification and medical documentation. Keene refused to look at it and repeated the demand to stand. A staff member, Maya Rios, stepped in after hearing the officer's repeated orders. She tried to explain that Daniel was a client and that the facility could confirm his condition and appointment. Keene ignored her and continued focusing on forcing Daniel to comply with something he could not do. The security guard, Daryl Webb, moved closer and watched the interaction. He stayed in the camera view and monitored Keene's position and hands, because Daniel was seated and could not create distance if the officer escalated. A bystander, Leah Park, began recording on her phone after hearing the officer insist a wheelchair user stand. Other people nearby stopped and watched. The scene became public in real time. Daniel stayed calm. He kept his hands visible and moved slowly. He told Keene he was going to reach for his ID and did it carefully. He tried to keep the interaction focused on documentation and verification. Keene did not accept that. He spoke over Daniel and treated Daniel's explanations as excuses. He acted like Daniel was refusing on purpose instead of stating a medical fact. Then Keene said he believed Daniel was faking. Witnesses heard it. The phone recording captured it. The security cameras captured it. Daniel tried again to provide identification. Keene stepped closer while Daniel was still reaching. Staff and security locked in on Keene's hands because the situation was now on the edge of physical contact. Keene kept the contact going even though Daniel had already explained his condition and offered proof. Keene repeated that Daniel needed to stand and walk. He treated Daniel's medical statement like a challenge instead of information. Daniel stayed controlled and tried to end the confusion the fastest way possible. He told Keene again that he could provide identification and medical documentation. He also pointed out the obvious context. He was outside an adaptive wellness center where many clients used mobility aids. He made it clear he was there for an appointment and that staff could confirm it. Keene refused to take the easy exit. He told Daniel that paperwork did not matter and that the only thing he would accept was Daniel standing up. He also warned Daniel that refusing orders would create a bigger problem for him. Witnesses later described Keene's tone as confrontational and dismissive, like he was trying to force a public submission. Maya Rios, the staff lead, stepped closer and tried a second time to de-escalate. She told Keene that Daniel was a regular client, that the facility could verify his identity, and that they had records confirming his disability and treatment schedule. She offered to retrieve documentation immediately. Keene rejected her involvement and treated her like she was interfering. He told her to step back and stop talking. He made it clear he would not speak with staff about Daniel's medical status. That decision mattered because it removed the simplest verification option in the entire scene. Daryl Webb, the security guard, moved into a position where he could be seen by both Daniel and Keene. He did not touch anyone. He did not threaten anyone. He did what trained security usually does in a medical facility. He became a visible witness and focused on behavior and safety. He also indicated that the cameras were recording the entrance and curb area. Keene did not change his approach after being reminded about cameras. He did not slow down, and he did not call a supervisor. He stayed close to Daniel and continued repeating the same demand. Daniel attempted again to provide his ID. He told Keene he was reaching slowly, then moved his hands toward his identification. He kept his movements deliberate and visible. He was clearly trying to avoid any claim that he was doing something unsafe. Keene reacted as if Daniel's movement itself was suspicious. He told Daniel to stop moving and accused him of not following instructions. Several witnesses later said Keene was creating a situation where Daniel could not do anything correctly. If Daniel reached for ID, Keene treated it like a threat. If Daniel kept still, Keene treated it like refusal. Leah Park, the bystander, stayed recording the entire time. She adjusted her angle to keep both Keene and Daniel in frame, including Daniel's hands and Keene's position. She also captured the staff and security presence. More bystanders gathered, and the scene became loud, with people reacting and trying to tell Keene that Daniel could not stand. Keene's next move was to take control of the wheelchair space. He stepped in closer and positioned himself so Daniel could not roll away without bumping him. Daniel did not attempt to move the chair into Keene. He stayed stationary and focused on getting his identification out. Maya told Daryl to contact management and request a supervisor response. Daryl used his radio to notify facility leadership and to document the officer's behavior near a client with a declared disability. Someone in the crowd also called 911 and reported that an officer was demanding a wheelchair user stand and that the situation looked like it was about to turn physical. Daniel kept his voice steady. He repeated that he was paraplegic, that he could provide proof, and that he wanted the contact handled properly. He also told Keene that the facility had cameras and witnesses, and that he wanted everything documented. He did not insult Keene. He did not threaten him. He stayed focused on process and verification. Keene responded by treating Daniel's mention of cameras and documentation as disrespect. Witnesses described Keene's face and body language changing at that moment, like he felt challenged in public. He told Daniel to stop talking and comply. He then reached toward Daniel in the chair, while Daniel was still trying to provide ID. Keene placed a hand on the wheelchair and then moved his hand toward Daniel's arm. This was the point where multiple witnesses started shouting for him to stop. Maya stepped forward and told Keene not to touch Daniel and to wait for a supervisor. Daryl moved closer, still not touching anyone, but clearly preparing to intervene if Keene used force. Daniel tightened his posture and stopped reaching for his wallet because Keene's hands were now on him. Daniel kept his hands visible and tried to keep his balance in the chair. He told Keene again that he could not stand and that forcing him would cause injury. Keene did not step back. He kept hold of the chair and Daniel's arm. He looked around at the crowd, then back at Daniel, and continued acting like he was about to prove something in front of everyone. Keene tightened his grip instead of stepping back. He kept one hand on the wheelchair and used the other to control Daniel's arm. Daniel stopped reaching for his identification because he was trying to keep his balance and keep his hands visible. Maya Rios moved closer and told Keene to stop touching Daniel and wait for a supervisor. Daryl Webb, the security guard, moved into a position where he could clearly be seen by the cameras and bystanders. Leah Park kept recording from a few steps away, holding her phone steady. Keene ignored all of it. He acted like the crowd was the problem, not his hands on a wheelchair user. Daniel remained seated and repeated his condition and the risk of injury. He did not raise his voice. He did not threaten. He focused on keeping the interaction procedural and safe. Keene did not treat it as a safety issue. He treated it as a contest. Witnesses later described him as determined to force a physical demonstration. He shifted his stance and pulled. It happened fast. Keene yanked Daniel forward and out of the wheelchair. Daniel did not have leg control to catch himself. He went down onto the pavement hard. People screamed. Maya rushed forward. Daryl stepped in and ordered distance while also calling for emergency help. Leah's phone captured Daniel on the ground and Keene standing over him. Daniel immediately showed clear signs of serious injury. His wrist position was wrong, and he could not brace himself normally. His face struck the ground, and he had visible facial injuries. He was conscious, but in shock and pain. He tried to stay controlled, but his breathing changed, and he kept his eyes focused, like he was trying to track what Keene would do next. Keene did not provide calm, clear aid. Witnesses said he looked around first, like he was checking who had seen it. Then he began trying to frame what happened as something other than force. He acted like Daniel had simply fallen during the interaction. That claim did not match what everyone had just seen. Multiple people immediately challenged it. The bystander recording continued without interruption. The facility cameras were still rolling from above, covering the chair, the officer's hands, and the fall path. Maya told staff to call 911 again and report that an officer had pulled a wheelchair user onto the pavement. Daryl instructed another employee to keep the area clear and to preserve the security footage. He also told someone at the front desk to notify facility management immediately. Daniel's wheelchair was tipped and out of position. A staff member and a bystander tried to stabilize it without moving Daniel. Daniel told them not to lift him abruptly. He stayed focused on preventing further injury and asked for medical help. Keene remained near Daniel and continued speaking as if he needed to control the narrative. He tried to make it sound like Daniel's body had caused the outcome, not his own actions. But the crowd, the phone video, and the camera coverage made that harder by the second. Within minutes, sirens were audible in the distance. More people gathered near the entrance. Several witnesses stayed in place specifically because they understood what would happen next. An official report would be written, and the report might not match what the cameras showed. EMS arrived and moved straight to Daniel. Staff from the wellness center guided them in and told them what happened. Daniel stayed conscious and gave short, clear answers. He told them he was paraplegic, that he had been pulled from his wheelchair, and that his wrist and face were injured. Keene stayed nearby and kept talking, but now he had a problem. The crowd had grown, and more than one person was recording. Maya Rios remained close enough to be heard and seen, and she made sure EMS and arriving responders understood that Daniel had not just fallen. Daryl Webb stayed focused on two things: keeping people back so EMS could work, and making sure the security footage was preserved. Leah Park did not stop recording. She captured the moments after the fall. Daniel on the ground, the wheelchair displaced, staff reacting, and Keene trying to control the scene. As EMS stabilized Daniel, Keene began framing the incident as an accident. Witnesses later said he used language that minimized his own role. He presented it as if Daniel's movement or the chair caused the fall. That version did not match what the crowd saw, and it did not match what the cameras captured. A second officer arrived and immediately looked confused by the scene. He saw a wheelchair user on the pavement, EMS working, staff upset, and multiple bystanders filming. The second officer attempted to get basic information and asked what happened. Keene answered in a way that put distance between himself and the force. Witnesses reported that he avoided saying he pulled Daniel out. Maya gave a direct account to the second officer and to facility management as they arrived. Keene had ordered Daniel to stand, refuse medical proof, then grabbed him and pulled him from the wheelchair. She also stated there were security cameras covering the exact area. Daryl told management which cameras had the clearest angles and confirmed that the system recorded audio near the entrance. He also documented the time and the positions. He treated it like an incident that would later be disputed because he had seen that pattern before. Daniel was transported to the hospital. The injuries were not minor. His wrist fracture required surgery, and he had facial fractures that needed specialist evaluation. Staff who knew him described him as tough and controlled, but this was the kind of injury that changes recovery timelines and daily function, especially for someone who relied heavily on upper body strength. Within hours, the first clip started moving online. Leah's video was short, clear, and hard to misinterpret. People shared it with captions calling out what they were seeing. An officer demanding a wheelchair user stand, then the man ending up on the ground. By that evening, the wellness center's security video became the missing piece everyone asked for. The facility did not release it immediately, but multiple employees confirmed it existed and covered the moment clearly. That alone increased pressure because it meant this was not going to depend on one person's word. The police department released an initial statement that tried to reduce the incident to a routine interaction and a fall during a compliance issue. It did not match what witnesses were already describing, and it did not match what the bystander footage suggested. That mismatch is what accelerated everything. The next day, Daniel's name spread, and so did his background. People learned he was a medically retired federal agent and that he had been paraplegic since 2015. That mattered because it made the faking idea look even more reckless. And it made Keene's insistence on forcing a stand look less like confusion and more like refusal to accept reality. Internal Affairs opened an investigation quickly because there was injury, video, and public attention. Civilian Oversight also initiated a review because the incident involved force against a person with a declared disability and multiple independent recordings. Keene was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. The department used careful wording at first, but the timing made it obvious they were reacting to the video, not just the injury. Meanwhile, Daniel's medical documentation, appointment records, and history at the facility created a clean timeline. He was there for legitimate care, he had a documented disability, and staff could confirm it. The question was no longer whether Daniel was who he said he was. The question was why Keene ignored every verification option and then used force anyway. Internal Affairs moved fast because this wasn't a private complaint. It was a public incident with injuries, multiple witnesses, and video from more than one angle. Investigators pulled everything that mattered in the first 48 hours. Dispatch logs, radio traffic, Keene's incident report, witness statements, EMS records, and the Wellness Center's security footage. Civilian Oversight opened a parallel review and requested the same materials, including any prior complaints tied to Keene. The security video became the center of the case because it showed the full sequence without gaps. Daniel seated in the wheelchair, Keene standing close, Keene refusing verification, Keene putting hands on Daniel in the chair, and Daniel ending up on the ground. Investigators compared that timeline to Keene's written account. Keene's report leaned hard on minimizing language. He described the outcome as a fall during a tense interaction. He framed Daniel as non-compliant and suggested Daniel's movement contributed to the fall. That might have worked in a case with no video. Here it made things worse because the footage showed Keene initiating the physical pull while Daniel was trying to provide identification. Internal Affairs interviewed the Wellness Center staff early. Maya Rios gave a detailed statement about Keene refusing medical proof and refusing staff verification. Daryl Webb gave a statement about the camera coverage, Keene's positioning, and the moment Keene made contact. Leah Park turned over her phone video and explained why she started recording, because Keene repeatedly demanded a wheelchair user stand and walk. Daniel's records from the facility also mattered. They showed he was a client with a documented disability, he had a scheduled appointment, and staff knew him. That removed any argument that Keene had no way to confirm Daniel's status. The facility verification was available in real time and was offered more than once. Civilian Oversight did what they always do in a high-visibility force case. They looked for pattern. They reviewed prior complaints involving Keene, including incidents where he escalated routine contacts, used aggressive commands early, or framed people as uncooperative after they asked basic questions. Even if some older complaints had been closed without discipline, the pattern became relevant once this video existed. The department tried to stabilize public reaction with cautious statements at first. That didn't hold. The online response kept growing because the facts were simple and easy to understand. People didn't need legal training to recognize the problem. A wheelchair user repeatedly said he could not stand, offered proof, and still got pulled onto pavement. Within weeks, the department released findings that Keene had violated use of force policy and failed to properly assess and respond to a declared disability. Internal Affairs cited unnecessary escalation, improper physical contact, and inaccurate reporting. Civilian oversight backed the conclusions and criticized the department for not intervening earlier based on Keene's prior history. Keene's career collapsed in stages, and each stage was tied to evidence, not opinion. First came administrative leave. Then came suspension and formal charges within the department. After that, the department moved towards termination. Keene's union representation tried to frame it as a misunderstanding and a chaotic scene, but the footage made that argument weak. The visuals showed the sequence clearly, and witness statements matched the video. Keene was fired, his name and record followed him, and he became unemployable in the same kind of work. Decertification proceedings were initiated, and his ability to remain in law enforcement became a separate issue handled by the state-level process. The district attorney's office reviewed the case for possible charges. The public wanted criminal accountability. The review happened and it was documented, but the case's final outcome on that specific point depended on legal thresholds and local decisions. What did not depend on discretion was the department's administrative decision and the civil case that followed. Daniel's recovery became a long process. The broken wrist required surgery and impacted his independence because he relied on upper body function for nearly everything. Facial fractures required specialist care and follow-up. Beyond the physical injuries, Daniel had to deal with something that hits hard for anyone with a disability. Being treated like your body is a lie that needs to be proven to strangers. Daniel did not do what Keene likely expected, which was disappear quietly. He retained counsel and filed a civil rights lawsuit. The case built like a timeline, not like a speech. It was medical records, facility records, video statements, and the contradictions between what happened and what was written down after. The settlement came after the evidence was fully developed and the exposure was obvious. The city agreed to an $8 million settlement for Daniel. Part of the agreement included policy changes and training requirements tied specifically to disability interactions, verification, and escalation control. The department implemented changes that were hard to ignore: mandatory disability awareness and de-escalation training with scenario testing, clearer rules requiring officers to accept verification options when a disability is declared, supervisor response requirements in high-risk public contacts involving medical vulnerability, faster preservation and review procedures for third-party security footage, stronger monitoring of officers with repeated complaints tied to escalation. Daniel didn't turn into a public speaker overnight, and he didn't need to. The case itself became a reference point in the community. People used it to push for better procedures at the wellness center, at the department, and at city meetings. Staff at Lakeside also changed their own protocols, including faster escalation to management when law enforcement contacts occurred on site, and clearer guidance on preserving footage immediately. The lasting impact was simple. A person with a disability did not have to perform ability to satisfy a suspicion, and an officer could not rewrite reality just because he wanted control. Here's the question for you watching. If you had been standing there, would you have started recording, stepped in, called management, called 911, or stayed back? And have you ever seen someone disbelieved about their disability in a way that put them at risk? If you want more stories where evidence, oversight, and accountability actually matter, drop your thoughts in the comments. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next one.